That's amazing. Yeah.
About a program we did.
Good morning. I'm Mike Zafarowski. I'd like to welcome all of you to the Church of the Holy Spirit. We're a very nice in-person group, and I know Connie, a much larger group, watching Zoom and virtually. This is a very special Faith at Work session, number 130 on one hand, but also we have the privilege of having our very, very first speaker back in the fall of 2009, Connie Duckworth. So Connie, welcome. Before introducing Connie, as we normally do, start with a prayer. Father Luke.
Let us pray. The prayer book has a phrase about we who are wearied by the changes and chances of this world. This morning, we give thanks for the changes in our work culture that enabled a woman like Connie Duckworth to fulfill her God-given leadership potential. We are grateful for her presence with us here and the various ways she has blessed our church community and larger community. We also, like our Lord, delight in her attention to God's most vulnerable women and children in far-off corners of the earth. Let us thank heaven that God's loving power is often made most obvious in a loving human response to the chances and changes of life. Amen.
Thank you, Father Luke. Connie, some things have not changed. We typically cover three things: your life story, your faith journey, and how you bring faith to work. We've had people from all walks of life. And as I like to say, God does his work through many people, many different professions, all unique. And certainly your story is very, very unique. Cannot wait to start our discussion. But before that, a very, very quick bio. I mean, hopefully you have read the bio, but...
Let's make this part really quick, please.
Connie retired from Goldman after 20 years. She was the first partner in the sales and trading organization. Very deeply committed to economic empowerment in general, and in women empowerment in particular. She founded ARZU, which is hope in the Afghan language. And she was a pro bono CEO and chairman from 2002 until ARZU merged with a UK charity in 2019. She was also a founding member of the U.S.-Afghan Women's Council in Washington, D.C., and she was also in President Bush's Institute on Women Policy and Advisory Council out of Dallas. Connie's been on so many for and not-for-profit boards, too many to mention, and I'll take your lead not to mention all of them. Also a recipient of numerous awards for leadership and philanthropy. Connie graduated from University of Texas and an MBA from the Wharton School of Business. But beyond her professional achievements, Connie has a great partnership with her husband, Tom. They're just a wonderful couple. 4 millennium kids, Andrew, Elizabeth, William, and Caroline. And as of just last month, a proud grandmother. She's also been a long-term parishioner of CHS, a role model to many. And again, let's welcome again Connie Duckworth. We're going to go for about 35 or 40 minutes, and then we're going to open it up for Q&A. And I love this group this early in the morning, but maybe tell us about your early life, maybe the way to start.
Well, I think first of all, thank you for inviting me back, Mike. As we were just reminiscing, 15 years ago, we were a very tiny group in the armor room, and I think there might have been coffee, yeah. But it was at 7:30 in the morning too. So I think to sort of set the stage, and then before I launch into my early childhood, which I'll cover very briefly also, I wanted to just show a 1-minute video that was new to those of you who might have attended the last presentation. And this was sort of the penultimate moment in my work with ARZU. So Stu, can you take it away?
A lot of the great art being made in the Middle East today is being made by women. Probably because they're the most oppressed. I understood that Afghanistan is a country that's struggling. I knew there must be craftspeople there that were extraordinary. We can overcome a lot of the misunderstanding by communicating through the arts. We're not recognizing that enough. This is a way to open the door to their expression and hopefully help change the equation for the better.
So that's just a little teaser, and we'll come back to ARZU a little bit later. But I grew up as an Army brat, mostly in Texas, although after, in second grade, my dad was retired from the military. He was in the medical corps. We went to Baltimore till the end of sixth grade and lived in a new housing development, and I went to 6 different elementary schools. So that was one seminal moment for me. Then we returned to Houston for junior high, high school, and college at the University of Texas in Austin. And I was the youngest of 3 girls. Now, and that's important because for a couple reasons. As those of you who may have 3 or 4 children, you get progressively more lenient with each successive child. So I was allowed to do things like go to the movies without my parents, with my sister. She was 16 and I was 10, but that's okay. So I got to do everything a little earlier. And my dad knew with 3 girls that if he had any hope for legacy, that he was going to have to deal with little girls instead of with boys. And so that was a real value to me in the, growing up in the 50s and 60s, because especially in Texas, there were still, things, my girlfriends would be told, well, your brother can do that, but you can't do this. And so there were only 2 things I ever remember my dad telling me that I couldn't do. One was learn to surf. And not that the Gulf of Mexico is a hotbed of big waves, and usually. And 2, I couldn't mow the lawn. Now, my sisters were both allowed to mow the lawn, so I think there must have been a safety component or a klutz piece of this, these 2 prohibitions. But other than that, we were good to go. And so, what did that teach me as a child? Well, for one thing, moving around and changing schools helped me understand the value of relationships, and that you have to invest in new relationships over time, and you have to learn to make new friends. I also learned to embrace change and to, in fact, welcome it. And then it helped me become more of a risk taker, which was a factor really throughout my career. And my parents instilled a very strong work ethic to all of us. And in fact, my dad would say, again, put the context of late 50s, early 60s, that his job was to go to work, and my mother's job was to run the household and raise the children, and our job was to go to school and make good grades. And so I took my job very seriously. And so I grew up liking to work. I've always worked. I started working, after school, probably in sophomore or junior year in high school, and I've been working ever since. And it's kind of a hobby, but it's fun, and it also helps with a couple of things. I think it's helped me be a lifelong learner, because there's been so much change in all of our lives over time. It has given me the privilege of meeting whole new groups of people that I would never have met had I not been out in the world doing work. And I hope we've instilled this love of work and work ethic in our own children.
Wow. I can certainly attest to be easiest with a third. Our two older sons would always say that, but at least we moved around every 2 or 3 years, so you win that count of moving every year. You've had such a storied career. Maybe you can tell us the highlights of your business and professional career, the accomplishments, the lessons learned.
Well, I have had an amazing opportunity, again, luck and timing, of when I entered the workforce. I finished my MBA in 1979, and I ended up working first very briefly in the oil industry. The big advantage of that moment in time, that 2 years, is I happened to share a cubicle with the man who would become my husband, who was a chemical engineer. We both worked for ARCO, and they were on like an EEO kick, so it was Tom and 3 women in a 4-person cubicle. And of course, that meant they only gave the work to Tom, who had his desk stacked with, reams of those printed out computer things, because there was no on desktop capability. And the rest of us just sat there and chatted because they didn't give us any work. But, so that was the benefit of that job. And I always tell my kids and other people I've mentored, there's something good about every experience. You just have to recognize what that might be. But I had the great good fortune, because I moved to Goldman Sachs in 1981, and of really being present for the invention of most of the fixed income markets throughout the 80s and early 90s. And that was largely due to the advent of desktop computing, which allowed us to have capability to splice and dice the math of bonds. And so it was a very wild ride and a very fun time. The next big wave that I caught was in the early 90s, early to mid 90s, which was the rise of electronic trading platforms. And that I attribute largely to internet adoption. And that actually led me to my final role at Goldman Sachs. I was co-heading the municipal bond department, or bond business, in New York, when I came up with an idea for an electronic trading platform for odd lot municipal bonds, which are how most municipal bonds get sold. They get sold in $5,000 and $10,000 increments to moms and pops, and they never see the light of day again. So I came up with a very short business plan, like 1 page, and the firm funded it with a couple $1 million, and I took myself offline along with an MD, 2 analysts, and my secretary, and we formed a company. We ended up selling equity to our competitors, which was another sort of heresy at the time, because I wanted the most volume running through this platform. We did this for a couple, 2-3 years, until such time as the company was viable. The MD left the company to be president of the company. I retired at that point because I had the interesting experience of being in 9/11, being in New York for 9/11. So, but that entrepreneurial bug really bit me, and so I decided, I took 9/11 as a sign that it was time to come back to Chicago and spend more time with my family. And then the third technological innovation really that I believe led to social entrepreneurship, which wasn't a word back then, that wasn't a thing, was the advent of smartphones and cell phone telephony, because that allowed all these developing countries to leapfrog. And we worked in a place in Afghanistan that had no internet access whatsoever. But by the time we concluded, I would say 80 to 90% of our weavers had cell phones. So all of those sort of technology aspects really influenced my career. And I went on to do a couple of different things then after I retired. One is I co-founded an angel group in Boston and our screen was women CEOs. And these were early stage startups. I called them my portfolio of high risk, early stage businesses. Tom called them my women's charities because I had maybe a dozen companies. I'd say probably 9 or 10 of them went broke immediately. But I had one winner, which was Zipcar. And that sort of paid for the rest of them.
Isn't it typical? 9 out of 10 startups normally not make it, but one?
Yeah, those are kind of the stats, and I was true to the case. I was no unicorn, and but what it did again is it opened my world to a whole group of women and other companies and entrepreneurs that I would never have met otherwise. And then the other thing I did was that I became involved in Afghanistan, as I'll talk a little more about. And the interesting thing about this, and this goes to sort of lifelong learning and relationships. I got a call from a friend of mine. I was chairing a women's business organization at the time, and she was an ambassador in the Bush 43 era. And she said, I put your name in for something, you might get a call. I said, oh, what's that? She said, well, President Bush is starting a presidential initiative called the U.S. Afghan Women's Council. And it's to help women, Afghan women, have a seat at the table in new Afghanistan after the fall of the Taliban. This was in January of 2002. And I figured, oh, interesting. So I did get a call, and I joined as the first business representative. And there were probably a half a dozen civilians and a half a dozen White House and State Department people in different areas, so education, healthcare, different areas. And I thought, oh, this will be interesting to do for the next year or two. Well, believe it or not, we had our 20th anniversary in 2022.
Wow.
This initiative, in a polarized political world, this initiative is permanently housed at Georgetown University. The State Department still seconds an officer to be the executive director on a rotational role every 2 to 3 years. And the council has grown to probably 60 or 80 people.
Wow.
It has seamlessly transitioned from the Bush administration through the Obama administration, through the Trump administration, through the Biden administration. So it's like the little train that could, and it still keeps me with probably a toe in, not a whole, 1 step, 2 step, I'm up to my neck in quicksand, which I had been in Afghanistan. But it still keeps me current. And again, another opportunity that I couldn't have predicted that opened a whole new world of people and relationships and lifelong learning. When I started ARZU, I knew nothing about Afghanistan. I knew nothing about international development. I knew nothing about rugs, certainly, and I knew nothing about Islam. And on a couple of those, I was designated as like a subject matter expert. On a couple, I just am a novice, but I sort of am just deeply interested in these things.
Oh.
So that's my career. And this experience also led me to some changes in my faith journey. So.
Yeah, I think we'll discuss that next, but I vividly remember your discussion 9/11. Maybe provide a quick refresher reminder on that day, and then how you got back to Chicago. I mean, again.
It was a beautiful day in New York. I had flown in the night before, and I was actually staying with one of my good friends who was my partner in crime running the municipal bond department. And I was at a breakfast in Midtown and on my way to the office, and about 9 o'clock, the assistant came in and said a plane has hit the tower. And so we all assumed that it was a Cessna, because that would happen from time to time. And we all looked at our watches and said, we better just go ahead and break up. The traffic will be terrible getting downtown. But by the time we got to the building, we knew what was happening. And so I went uptown back to her apartment, and she eventually got back. And we walked around the city. We stood in line for a long time to give blood until the police came up the line and said, why don't you check back later? We don't think we need blood because of the lack of survivors. And you look down, you'd stand in Park Avenue, look down whole island and just see this mushroom cloud. We finally got out. I finally got back to Chicago Thursday night. This was Tuesday morning. I drove back with Dave Coolidge, who was the president of Blair, we were both calling United so many times that they finally gave each other cell phone numbers. And he had been staying around the corner at his brother's because he hadn't checked into his hotel yet. And so we got a rental car, we hit the pedal to the metal, and we made it back in record time. And Tom said it was one of those wartime experiences. We were sharing the plug because he was on the committee to reopen the market or not, and there was a lot of pressure to reopen the stock exchange. And I dropped him at his house because, you know, it was on the way to Lake Forest. And Tom said the next day when he took the rental car back, he goes, "Golly, you guys are like worse than college kids on a road trip." He said, not only were there like the Dorito bags and the Coke cans in the back seat, but there were crumpled Wall Street journals and pages from yellow pads. So anyway.
Wow. You started saying that it started impacting your faith journey as well. Maybe that's maybe a good place to start.
It did. I was a cradle Episcopalian, as is Tom, and we also neither of us drink coffee. So the fact that we're both cradle Episcopalians and don't drink coffee is probably the smallest Venn diagram in the United States. And so, you know, I grew up like good Episcopalians. I went to Sunday school. I played Mary once in the nativity pageant, but also like good Episcopalians, as my older sisters got into junior high and high school, once they were confirmed, they stopped coming to church. And so then my parents started to, you know, become more Easter and Christmas Episcopalians. But I always loved the liturgy. I would, in high school and college, I kept going to church just because I liked it. I liked the familiarity of this wonderful language that, you know, our communities have been saying for 500 years. And I think it's very comforting, no matter where you are in the world. You can go to an Anglican church and hear the same service that you would be hearing here at home. And I spent a year in Paris in school, and that was sort of before people did that. That was in the mid-'70s. And I would go to the American Cathedral on Avenue Georges V, and it was great to hear English, number one, and then number two, you know, it was Americans and Brits, and they had coffee hour and donuts, and, you know, free food is always good if you're a student. And then Elizabeth, my daughter Elizabeth, and I were in India one year, and we went to an Easter service in Delhi at the cathedral, and we went to what we thought was the oldest cathedral from the 1700s, but it was now in a largely Indian congregation, and I think there were 3 other you know, non-Indians there, and everyone was in their saris, and the colorful nature and the flowers, and it was a really memorable event. So once we had our own family, like good Episcopalians, of course, we came back and got re-involved with the church so that they could be baptized and confirmed. And hopefully the cycle restarts. You know, and I became more active at CHS at that time. So I taught either Sunday school or confirmation for 16 years because I had 4 kids, so I'd rotate, you know, who got me. I co-chaired Chris Kindle. I sat on the finance committee for probably 10 years. I was on George Council's vestry. I ran I was not in a leadership role. I was the workman at the win a fish and cotton candy machine for many years at Spring Fair. But it's my belief that you owe it to your children to raise them in an organized religion, because if you don't, and the temptations are great not to, then you're making a de facto decision for them. And will they ever come back to the church? Who knows? But by giving them that base, you've given them the basis for their own judgment down the road. Mm-hmm.
And maybe a question in terms of, obviously, that, you know, Robbie has also been a lifelong generational Episcopalian, and there's the beauty, the comfort, if you will, the consistency of the church. There's the next level of obviously we're up to 9 grandkids right now, and I always admire how much they know, whether it's Harry Potter or some of the others, I mean, the kids really know the substance. Whether you believe it or not, they can explain it. And first time I'm a mentor for Tommy Helms as he's going through a confirmation process. And then you go through the thing is how much do you teach of the practices as opposed to the stories the Bible says it? And I'd love to get your perspective again. There's the formalities, the process we go through, and there's the story of Jesus and obviously the Old Testament. I'd love to get your perspectives on that.
You know, I think that it is the learnings that do impact life, and I would say that from my perspective, I think my faith practice has basically sort of set the basic standard for just that governs day-to-day life, whether that's professional or personal. And, you know, all of it translates sort of broadly into this just innate sense of fair play. You know, whether it's the Golden Rule, the Ten Commandments, to whom much is given, much is expected, treating others as you would like to be treated, I think has served me as a guidepost over the course of my career. And I think I was a better manager of people because of this sort of just innate view of how you treat other people. And I think it also led me to my willingness and ability to mentor, you know, hundreds, if not thousands, of young professionals over the course of my career, many of whom were women who needed that extra help. And I would say that at Goldman, I was known to have the most diverse teams because, again, I think I just looked at the innate qualities of a person and was less you know, I held myself less to the standard of what a Goldman Sachs employee, you know, young professional should look like meaning look like me, and I happen to be a white guy, you know, who went to boarding school and an Ivy League college. And I also had an unusually high number of people that I either recruited or trained that went on to become partners of the firm. And I think, again, it was this this sort of bringing this sense of fair play into that I learned from church into the workforce.
Maybe we can discuss some of the seminal events in your life that deepened your faith. Obviously, you mentioned 9/11, but...
And I'd say there were two other seminal events for me. One was my son Andrew's birth. We were 35, first child, and I had a medical emergency that was caused, they learned a decade later, by a genetic defect. I had a missing enzyme that triggered liver failure. So I went in 1 week from being a healthy, you know, 7.5-month pregnant woman who went to work every morning and worked out at the end of the day to being in complete liver failure. And the man who married Tom and me ended up doing last rites on me on a Friday. And they told Tom, because I was unconscious, that if we lived, if Andrew lived, he had an APGAR of 1 when he was born, so they had to jumpstart his heart. He was totally blue. He wasn't breathing. If he lived, he would be brain damaged and blind. So fast forward after the last rites, 2 days later, my liver started to function. And today, and it took me about 6 months, but I recovered from that illness completely. And Andrew, is 34 now. He played college tennis. He's 6'5". He does not wear glasses, and he was a straight A student. So what's the result of this? This was like being, it was one of those, gee, I could have had a V8 moments, right? It was like being clunked on the head when you were young enough to actually have that matter to your life. And it materially changed the way we progressed as a family. And it was the grace of God. There's no other explanation. There's no medical explanation, because when I had this particular condition, there were 200 reported cases worldwide. 100 mothers were dead and 100 babies were dead. And so the fact that we both lived, in no matter what condition, was like a 1 in 4 outcome. So, And so to have this miraculous outcome, it is what it is. And so that really strengthened my faith. And I would say the other seminal moment was really going back to work in Afghanistan, where I had the unique opportunity to work with incredibly devout people. These are people that literally have nothing but their faith. It's a different faith than mine, but it's all one God. And these are people that were, exiles, that were refugees, that were returnees to nothing, no homes, no food, no work, no safety and security. And yet I learned a lot by observing how they conduct themselves and how they welcomed guests. And so that was, I think it strengthened my own faith, being around people who were so devout.
Wow.
And then I'll say one other thing. It also led me, and you to our friend Ibu Patel, because...
you spoke here, remember that packed room, yeah?
And Ibu was a young man when I met him. He was probably 28. He's a brilliant Rhodes Scholar, PhD, who founded what was at that time called the Interfaith Youth Corps here in Chicago. He grew up in the suburbs of Chicago. Mm-hmm. And his mission is really to broaden the interfaith dialogue in the U.S. and help lower divisions. And so I met him early on, right after he founded his organization. I want to say about the time I founded ARZU. So I met him, and we had dinners and lunches and so forth. And then I finally joined his board for about 10 years. And so that was another really interesting learning experience, to have, Muslims, Christians, Jews coming together, and also agnostic people and atheists, people of all religious backgrounds, just to share their thinking. So that was another.
Yeah, Ibu is pretty amazing. We hosted him at Bucknell and at Duke, and he really connected with the students at both universities.
And you know how old Ibu is now? He's like almost 50.
A kid?
Process that one.
Still a kid.
Yeah.
Everything is relative, yeah. And how does faith translate into work? I mean, you've made a number of comments already, but anything else to add on that?
No, I really think that, it ties back to work and work ethic and, just striving to be God's hands and feet in the world.
Yeah, Jesus is a carpenter, right?
Yeah.
From age 7 to age 30 before he started his ministry. Unfortunately, Afghanistan has fallen out of the news cycle. It seems that the news media and all of us maybe have a very short
memory,
attention span. Yeah, but but what's happening there? What happened to ARZU? And if time allows, again, what philanthropies are you involved in?
I would say that. Let me just do a time.
With plenty of time, yeah.
Okay. I would say that. Well, to start with, our pullout August 30th, 2021 is an unmitigated disaster.
Yep.
Full stop. We could put our money in Afghanistan, but they did the deal. And so we merged the organizations in 2019, and they took over our entire footprint in Bamiyan, as well as made the decision to expand in the rug industry, which is a
but can women work now? Maybe that's what or is it accepted deviation, accepted exception, if you will?
Part of it is having the advantage of working in the middle of nowhere with the most underserved minority Shiite population of the country. They're the dog everybody wanted to kick. And they were in this really harsh, think like Oklahoma, think like Indian reservation land, right? Luke, no water, so no agriculture, no employment, high desert plateau, ringed by the Hindu Kush, cut off in the winter. Difficult logistically, but they were so grateful for the opportunities that we presented. So we had at our peak like 500 people working in Bamiyan. We were the largest employer. And originally, again, not knowing any better, I never flew in expats to run things. I trained local Afghans. So we were always viewed as a local economic generator. Women's centers, our rug weaving centers, our preschools, are all still working, and our women are working. And so, so Arzu is, again, the little train that could.
Good.
And I'm going to show a couple of videos now that a picture's always worth 1,000 words in Afghanistan, but 2 new projects. One is they mounted a major rug exhibition, multimedia rug exhibition in Doha. And you'll see a little clip of that. And then, very importantly, UNESCO, which had given both of our organizations funding, and even though they said, we're only going to fund one organization in Afghanistan, but then they'd look at us and they'd say, okay, we'll give 2. They funded, about 10 minutes outside of one of our villages is this very cool structure. It's one of the original caravanserai from the Silk Road days, where camel trains would come through and they'd come into this walled compound. So I always thought it would make a great, like, relais chateau when tourism returns to Afghanistan. That's the long game. So they got a UNESCO grant to rehab this caravanserai and make it into a cultural center for the region, as well as ultimately we'll have our finishing, some of our processing of rugs, the washing and finishing there. And so, let's see the first video where you hear Shoshana Stewart, who's the CEO. She sends me little updates. I'm theoretically an advisor to Turquoise Mountain. It's like, I think, the grandparent kind of advisor. I just do the fun stuff.
Hey Connie, just wanted to say hi from Shushpool. I'm here in school, obviously, with some of your colleagues. Just wanted to thank you for everything that you've done and for allowing us to be the stewards of it going forward. But my God, the school's incredible. You know, these are 5- and 6-year-olds, and they're breaking for food right now, but I've just watched them working. And, you know, our son is 6, and they are writing at a higher level than he is in his British school. It's just so moving what high quality it is, and the teachers that you had and that we're supporting now. So thank you, and yeah, sending lots of love from Bamiyan. So here in the Shashpool Weaving Center, there's Sharifa and everyone else. Salam alaikum. They are working on a carpet for an American company, and their kids are next door. You can see on the other side.
And then there's one additional video we'll show now, which is of the exhibit in Doha, which they have partnered with some famous rug designers in both the UK and you can go ahead and tee that up. Yeah, here she goes.
Hi everyone, I wish you were here. I'm in Doha, at Design Doha, and we have this huge exhibition about Afghan carpet weaving designed by Mariam Omar. And it is bringing to life all the traditions around carpet weaving, but also the place of Bamiyan. So you have 24 contemporary carpets, and they're inspired. Mariam's created them based on the poetry that's recited by women when they weave, and this landscape. So you can see the cliffs of Bamiyan, the mountains, the skies, and it's a very overwhelming space. You have the sounds, a very calming sound, and then you have the sound of weaving over it, and then periodically you get the sound of one of the daughters of one of the weavers reciting the poetry. So, you know, kudos to Mariam for bringing this thing to life, but also to bringing these traditions and at times the voices of these women outside of Afghanistan into the world. And I'm very much hoping we can travel this exhibition.
And then lastly, I'll just show a couple of pictures of, and you can just scroll through. That's one of our weavers who's been with us for a long time. Next. And here's some of the carpets. This is from the exhibit. But you can see we do traditional as well as modern carpets. Next. One of our students. And this is what gives me hope, these children. Next. And there's our preschools. Next. And we still do some small classes quietly. Next. And offer some health care. Next. And our weavers weaving.
Wow.
Next. Next. There's rugs, the modern ones. Next. That's pictures of the exhibit we just saw. Next.
Wow.
Now, this is the caravanserai I was talking about. And isn't that just the coolest thing ever? Next, and that's very typical. It's summertime, obviously, so they hand water all that, anything that's green. Next. And that's part of the walls. But you could see it's majestic. Next. And they're making traditional mud bricks to do the repair work. Next. And those are again, they're rebuilding vaults. There
wow.
she is.
Thank you. We only have about 5 minutes, maybe a couple questions before we do the closing prayer. But Connie, what a joy and pleasure to have you back here, and so inspirational, and just this is a really role modeling for what's possible at any point of time in our lives. But just in this group, all right.
So Connie, thanks for this. It was great. We've known you guys a long time. I never knew the Andrew story, and maybe talk a little bit about the decision to go on and have 3 more tremendous children after going through what you went through.
Well, at the time I went through this, they didn't know what caused it. They didn't know for till after I'd had all 4 of them that it was a genetic potential.
And maybe it's
issue.
good.
What you don't know doesn't hurt you, right? So, and again, for whatever reason, I can only say the grace of God, it didn't happen again. And I went on to have 3 more children in 4 years, and they were all full term. And so had we known, we may have made a different decision. So go figure.
Thanks, Connie. Not, putting aside American foreign policy and politics and all that, I mean, as someone who really has spent time, with the Afghan people, what are your thoughts on the people themselves and, their future? And obviously, we're really in a low point here. But, is there anything to look to within the social structure there that could give you any hope at all without any, foreign intervention?
There's always hope. And one thing I'll say about Afghanistan, because you could see some pictures, again, summer where there was little pockets of greenery, usually it looks like the moon. It's like brown rocks. But the Afghan people have been around for 5,000 years, and everybody has invaded them. I mean, Alexander the Great, Genghis Khan, the Russians, the Americans, the Brits, everybody's invaded it, and no one's lasted. And so I think at some point this worm will turn, and we know the Chinese are very interested. I think they've already bought all the coal deposits in Afghanistan, and they've been buying other deposits of minerals. Now, there are no roads. There's no way to access these, but another long game player is the Chinese. So I think to work in Afghanistan, you have to be an optimist, and at the core, these people are the most resilient people you have ever met in your life. I mean, they have weathered every adversity, and yet they are so willing to, to learn, to grow within their own cultural boundaries. So I'm never going to say it's never going to happen in Afghanistan. We're at a low patch, a very low patch right now, and it will set them back generations because you've got, again, it's almost like the cultural war in the Cultural Revolution in China, where you have a missing generation of people that were not educated, and it's going to be the same thing again.
Okay, Gail? Use the microphone, yep.
Bill and I, thank you. Bill and I have had the privilege of meeting the Duckworth family early on when rearing our children through a Montessori educational program here in Lake Bluff. And I just want to say, it's been so remarkable to me how Connie and Tom together, while Connie was, off really enlightening our world and doing spectacularly important work, how they raised 4 incredible human beings, all of whom are contributing so completely and beautifully to our world. And it's in large part due to their union and their devotion to one another, and making a decision not at all to neglect their family, but in fact, embrace them in a unified manner. So I just wanted to pay tribute to both of you and to the way in which you raise these incredible 4 people.
Thank you.
Fully agree with that.
I'm going to step in here for just a second. This has been a wonderful period of listening to your story, Connie, and I was just reflecting how, with all this tragedy of that people's, isn't it wonderful that something beautiful, a piece of art, is the hope, both financially, educationally, so many ways. It's something that transcends. It's wonderful.
Thank you.
Maybe a last question, make it a softball. Well, I guess it'll be 2. Mine really will be short, but go ahead.
We go way back, before Lake Forest. And we've shared a lot here in this place and in the wider community. We've reared our children together. I'm really interested in your mentoring and what you see as you mentor this group of people, our children, hardworking, really interested in doing the best for themselves and their families, but spending a whole lot of time working. What do you observe, not only from your own career, we've heard about that, but what do you observe in this next generation?
Well, I think hard work is like a prerequisite. And so, if anything, I wonder sometimes about all the those newfangled ideas about working, less, because I think that work gives you so much of an education. And so I think that when you look at life, and I kind of look at my life in kind of decade chunks, there are decades where you really just have to spend a lot of time working, but that empowers you then for other decades to focus on your family or other things. So I think there's a cycle to all of this. And in my experience, and one of the things that I told a lot of young people throughout the years is that there are so many smart people in this world. And if you ever think you're the best at something, add an ER onto the end of whatever adjective you're talking about: smart, wealthy, pretty, athletic, and there's somebody that, in fact, there's 10 people that are better than you in whatever category. So, and there's a lot of people that work hard, but what's astonishing, has always been astonishing to me, there aren't all that many people who are smart and who work hard. And so if you just work to your highest level of both intellectual capability and learning capability, as well as just grinding out the hard work, you'll astonish yourself.
Just as a follow-up, I completely agree with all the hard work. We've all done that. But do you see in this new generation them having the opportunity to know someone or to be in forums where they're thinking not only about their work now, but what will I do next? What will I do for the good of the world?
I certainly hope so. I do think this generation is very worldly in the context of having a much bigger platform than we ever did to see the broader world. I think they're keenly aware of what goes on. I also think they're very socially responsible. So I'm optimistic, very optimistic, that this generation will do great things and will be bridge builders, and because they see the world differently than we do. They're gender blind, color blind, handicap blind. I mean, they don't see divisions the way the older people see divisions necessarily. So I'm optimistic. Share that message.
I'll save my question, or you always finish with the Father's Prayer, but thank you again. What a great...
Thank you so much, Connie. Thank you all for being here. Let us pray. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen.
Thank you very much.
Everybody.